My name is Rebecca Hall, and on my mother's 60th birthday, she stood in the middle of a family party, pointed straight at me, and said in front of everyone, "You stole my inheritance." I froze, while the relatives looked at me as if I were a traitor. The lakefront mansion in Michigan that my grandmother had left to me suddenly became the center of a battle, and my mother was the one leading it. Have you ever had your own mother trample on your dignity just because of a piece of property? If my story resonates with you, leave a comment, hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel with the bell turned on so you can follow me on this journey. Because what happened next was far more ruthless, and I was forced to choose a path I could never turn back from. After that party, I left my mother's house in a daze. The public accusations still echoed in my head like a hammer strike. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how she could say something like that. I was used to being compared, overlooked, but she had never publicly crushed me so bitterly. On the drive back to my apartment in Chicago, I thought back to the moment 5 years earlier when my grandmother Margaret passed away. It was a late autumn afternoon, yellow leaves covering the yard of the lakefront mansion. I had arrived early that morning to help her sort through boxes of family photos and old books. She had grown frail, but her eyes were still bright, her smile still gentle. After the funeral, her lawyer read the will in a small meeting room in town. I sat next to my mother, while Melissa sat across from me, her face cold. When we got to the part where my grandmother left full ownership of the lakefront mansion to me, my mother's lip curled slightly, and Melissa frowned. I was so shocked I forgot to breathe, until the lawyer took out a faded yellow envelope that read, "For Rebecca. Open when you're ready." I remember opening it right there in the car, the smell of old paper and blurred ink mingling. My grandmother's handwriting was still neat and firm. "My dear Rebecca, this house is more than a place to live. It holds the history and story of our family. You are the only one who understands and cherishes every corner, every sound of the wind through the birches on the porch. Keep it because inside is a part of my past that you will understand when the time comes. If anyone tries to take it from you, remember, you have the right and you have the truth." I must have read that letter dozens of times, but the phrase "a part of my past" was something I never decoded. At the time, I simply thought she wanted me to keep the house for the memories, to keep it out of the hands of people who wouldn't value it. In the years that followed, I worked in Chicago but spent most weekends at the mansion. I restored every detail, replacing the roof, repairing the oak staircase, fixing the electrical system, planting more roses around the porch. Every morning, waking up to the shimmering lake, I felt as if she were still somewhere close. To my mother, though, that house was just unused property. She once said outright, "You can't hold on to that house forever. It's just wasting money on upkeep." I usually stayed silent, thinking she was just talking. But over time I realized she always saw the mansion as potential cash, especially after Melissa got engaged. After Melissa's engagement party, my mother came to my office. She sat across from me, set her handbag aside, her voice both soft and sharp. "Rebecca, you know Melissa and Josh are looking for a house, right?" He nodded. "I've heard, but the market is good right now. If you sell the mansion, that money would be enough to buy them a big house, close to us." I looked her straight in the eye. "Mom, that's my grandmother's legacy to me. I'm not selling." She smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You always think of yourself first. Family first, you second. Your grandmother would have wanted to help Melissa." I didn't respond. I knew arguing would only make her more determined to prove herself right. But I didn't expect that after that conversation, she would start acting behind my back. About a month later, I got a call from my elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson. "Rebecca, yesterday I saw your mom and sister bringing some strangers into the house. They said they were looking to buy." Froze. I had never allowed anyone to view the house, let alone my mother bringing in buyers. That afternoon I drove straight to the mansion. The front door was ajar, a few items in the living room out of place. I called my mother, my voice tight with anger. "What did you just do?" "Just showed it to someone." "Don't overreact. That's my property. It's the family's, Rebecca. Don't be selfish." I hung up, immediately changed all the locks, and installed extra security cameras. That night, I sat on the porch reading my grandmother's letter again, trying to find any clue about the past she mentioned. The letter suddenly made me recall an old memory. When I was about 13, one winter evening, my grandmother met with a strange woman in the living room. They spoke softly, and she gave the woman a thick envelope and some clothes. When I asked, she only said, "There are things you don't need to know yet. But remember, this house is always a safe place." I began to think, maybe the secret she referred to wasn't just a family story. Maybe it involved someone or something she wanted to protect. Late that night, I opened my laptop and searched through the files she had kept in the wooden cabinet in her study. Among the papers, I found a copy of an insurance contract from 1970, listing a beneficiary whose name I didn't recognize. Not a family member. Alongside it was an old photo of my grandmother standing next to a young man on the mansion's porch. On the back, in shaky but clear handwriting, it said, "Keep this place safe because it keeps you safe." I didn't fully understand, but my gut told me this was the key to dealing with my mother. If I could uncover this secret, I'd know why she chose me, and why my mother was so determined to take the mansion. Those thoughts stayed with me as I drove back to Chicago. I wondered, has anyone else ever been treated as an obstacle by their own mother, just because of a house? If you've been in that position, I hope you share, because sometimes empathy is what gives us the strength to keep going. The next day, I stopped by the city library to look up property records and old news about the mansion. The lakeside town was usually quiet, rarely making the papers, but I found a 1968 article about a domestic violence case where the victim disappeared and police never found her. The last line mentioned, "A source suggests the woman may have been helped by a relative in the Lake Michigan area." I read that line over and over, feeling like the pieces were starting to fit. Perhaps my grandmother had used the mansion as a shelter for someone, and that story still mattered even now. If the truth came out, my mother would have no argument left to force me to sell. That evening, I got a text from my mother. "Think it over. Melissa needs a home. Don't wait until the family has no way back." I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my laptop, looked out the window, and told myself, I will find out the whole truth wherever it leads. If you were in this position, would you keep the house or compromise? Comment below to see if my choice matches what you'd expect. I still remember that autumn morning when I stumbled upon something that showed me, more than ever, my mother's two-faced nature. It was a Saturday, and I stopped by her house to return some papers she'd sent to me by mistake. As I walked up the porch through the glass door, I saw my mother hosting two elegantly dressed women in the living room. Her smile was radiant, her voice warm and caring, the conversation about charity work, helping women in need, donating to local scholarships. They left with admiring looks, and my mother walked them to the door, her hand resting lightly on one woman's shoulder like a close friend. But the moment the door closed, the smile vanished. She turned, saw me, and her eyes instantly went cold. "Why are you here without calling first?" Her voice was dry. "I just brought back some papers," I said, handing her the folder. She took it without looking, then walked into the kitchen. I followed, still holding the image of her from just minutes earlier. Gentle, caring, full of goodwill, so different from the person now in front of me. Since childhood, I'd noticed the stark difference in how she treated me versus Melissa. With my sister, she was gentle, indulgent to the point of blindness. Dropped out of college. She called it finding her own path. Changed jobs constantly. She just hasn't found the right place yet. With me, every achievement was reduced to, "You're just doing your duty." I remember when I was named one of the top 10 young attorneys in the state. The newspaper had my picture on stage receiving the award from a federal judge. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen table. She glanced at it and said, "Yeah, that's good. But have you talked to Melissa this week? She's upset because she just broke up with her boyfriend." I used to tell myself I didn't need her recognition as long as I did my job well and lived my life the way I wanted. But when the mansion came into question, I saw clearly. This favoritism wasn't just emotional. It came with decisions that directly affected my life. One evening, my mother called. Her tone was unusually gentle. "Rebecca, I want you to come over for dinner. There's something important I want to discuss." I was wary but agreed. When I arrived, Melissa was already there in a brand new dress, looking radiant. The dinner table was carefully set, with roast beef my mother rarely made herself. We ate quietly for a while until my mother set down her knife and looked at me. "Rebecca, you know Melissa and Josh are getting married. They need a stable place to start their life." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "Melissa and I talked, and I think the lakefront mansion is the most reasonable solution." I raised my eyebrows. "Reasonable for who, Mom?" Melissa jumped in. "You don't use it much. You work in the city and only come on weekends. We could live there, take care of it, and keep it up." I took a deep breath. That's the property Grandma left me. It's not an empty house for anyone to just move into. My mother placed her hand on the table, her voice still sweet but loaded with pressure. "You always hold on to everything for yourself. Family means sacrifice. Melissa's starting a family and wants children soon. Don't you want your niece or nephew to grow up in a good environment?" I looked at Melissa. She didn't look guilty. In fact, she was smiling slightly, as if everything had already been arranged. "My niece or nephew will grow up fine if their parents can take care of themselves," I said evenly. "As for the mansion, I'm not selling, not renting, and definitely not handing it over." My mother's face shifted. She set her spoon down, the soft clink against the plate somehow sharp. "You're being selfish, Rebecca. If your grandmother were still alive, she'd want—" "No, Mom," I cut in. She said very clearly in her letter. She wanted me to keep the house, and she trusted me to do what's right. The room fell silent. Melissa stared at her plate. My mother looked at me like she was reassessing her daughter. I knew from that moment she wouldn't let this go. After dinner, as I reached the door, she followed me and said quietly, "Don't make me use other ways." I didn't reply, just walked away. But her words followed me all the way home, like a vague but dangerous warning. In the days after, I felt the pressure growing. A few relatives called, hinting about sharing assets. A close colleague told me my mother had stopped by my office when I was away to talk to my boss about my attitude toward family. I realized she didn't just plan to persuade me with sentiment. She was ready to use her social influence to pressure me. With her reputation as a charitable woman and an active member of various local clubs, she had plenty of people who listened and believed her. Knowing that, I became even more careful. I didn't want to get dragged into a public fight where every word could be twisted. I chose to stay silent, record her actions, and prepare for the worst. I knew my mother well. She never gave up on something she wanted, especially if it involved Melissa. And to her, I, the eldest daughter, was the one who had to give in to sacrifice for the family, no matter the cost. Looking back, maybe I'd gotten too used to enduring, which is why it took me so long to realize that this time I couldn't just step back. Because stepping back would mean betraying my grandmother's wish, and betraying myself. One morning in early October, I got a call from Mr. Peterson, my elderly neighbor in the lakefront town. His voice dropped, as if he didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. "Rebecca, I'm not sure if I should say this, but this morning I saw several unfamiliar cars parked in front of the mansion. Your mom, your sister, and some people dressed like real estate agents were walking around, opening every room. I thought, you should know." Froze. I immediately dropped the file I was reviewing. grabbed my coat, and got in the car. For nearly 2 hours driving from Chicago, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my heartbeat was pounding loud in my chest. When I arrived, the scene before me made me both angry and hurt. The front door of the mansion was wide open, unfamiliar shoes scattered across the porch. From the living room came the sound of footsteps and laughter. I stepped inside, my voice firm. "What is everyone doing here?" My mother turned around, holding a stack of documents, her expression calm as if I were the intruder. "You got here just in time. This is Steve, the real estate agent I asked to take a look at the house. We're discussing the price." Melissa stood by the window, arms crossed, a faint but unmistakably triumphant smile on her face. "See, the morning light here is amazing. This will be our master bedroom." I took a deep breath to stay calm. "This is my house. You have no right to bring anyone in here, let alone put it up for sale." My mother shrugged. "Don't make a big deal out of this. This is the family's house. Your grandmother wanted it to serve the common good. Holding on to it like this is selfish." I looked her straight in the eye. "Mom, I've made it clear. I'm not selling. And I won't allow anyone in here without my permission." The realtor, Steve, stood between us, glancing from me to my mother, clearly sensing the tension. "Maybe I should come back later," he stammered. "No need to come back," I cut in, "because there will be no sale." If this part made you feel a lump in your throat, hit like and share so more people can hear this story. The air in the room grew heavy. My mother set the papers down on the table and stepped toward me. "You're going against your own mother over a house?" "No, Mum. I'm protecting my legal property and my grandmother's wishes." In that moment, I realized I was no longer the child who sat quietly while my mother decided everything. I was ready to stand my ground, even knowing this would escalate everything. After they left, I immediately called a locksmith. All the locks were replaced that afternoon. I also contacted a security company to install cameras around the house. I had never imagined needing to protect the mansion from my own family, but now it was necessary. That night, sitting on the porch and looking at the moonlight shimmering over the lake, I thought about my grandmother. If she were alive, how heartbroken she would be to see her daughter and granddaughter treating each other like strangers. I whispered into the darkness, "Grandma, I promise I won't let them take this place from me." My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "You should reconsider. Things will be easier if you cooperate." I set the phone down without replying. The next day, I received an email from a law office in town, friends of my mother, requesting to discuss shared property rights. They asked to meet over the weekend. I knew it was just a pressure tactic, but I agreed because I wanted to hear my mother's plan directly. The meeting took place in a small cafe near the pier. My mother and Melissa were already seated, with a man in a suit beside them who introduced himself as Jeff, their lawyer. As soon as I sat down, Jeff opened his file. "We'd like to propose an agreement. Rebecca will agree to sell the mansion. Part of the money will go toward buying Melissa and Josh a home. The rest will be split equally." I looked him straight in the eye. "This proposal is meaningless. The house is my legal property, clearly stated in the will and documents. No one can force me to sell." My mother cut in, her tone tinged with reproach. "Rebecca, being so stubborn will only make things harder. I don't want to take this to court." "You can do whatever you want," I replied, "but I won't sign anything." Melissa leaned toward me, her voice low but venomous. "You'll regret this." "No, Melissa. The one who will regret it won't be me." Leaving their cold stares behind, I stepped out into the street. The wind off the lake hit my face, clearing my head. I knew I had just lit the fuse for a real fight, and from now on, every step I took had to be calculated. On the drive back, I wondered, how many people have had to lock their own home to keep their family out? If you've been in that situation, you know the mix of sadness and fury it brings. Leave a comment because sometimes sharing your story can help someone else find the strength to stand up. That night, I got an alert from the camera system. Motion detected on the front porch. I opened the app and saw my mother standing there, a ring of keys in hand. She tried them one by one, but of course none worked. She stood for a long time, then left. I sat there for a while, then emailed the video to myself to keep as evidence if needed. I had entered a new stage, where every move my mother made could be an attack, and I had to be ready to respond. I knew one thing for certain. If I softened now, everything would be gone instantly. And this time I wasn't going to lose. After my mother failed to open the locks, I became even more cautious. I decided not just to defend, but to dig deeply into the secret my grandmother had once mentioned. My instincts told me that was the key to not only keeping the mansion, but preserving her true intentions. The next evening, I drove to the mansion alone. Late autumn air was cold, fog from the lake thick on the car windows. Inside, the scent of old wood and lavender sachets my grandmother used to place in the closets still lingered. I turned on the light in her study, a room I had barely touched since she passed. The oak desk still sat in the corner, the drawer locked. I remembered how she used to smile and say, "When you truly need it, you'll find it," whenever I asked about the key. I knelt down, shining a flashlight into every corner. Under the drawer was a small hollowed section of wood. Inside was a tiny brass key wrapped in a handkerchief. The lock wasn't in great shape, but when I turned the key, the soft click felt like opening a door to another time. Inside were neatly clipped documents, several faded photographs, and a dark brown leather notebook. I sat down and examined each photo. Most were of my grandmother when she was young, but some included faces I didn't recognize. In one, she stood in front of the mansion with a young woman in a dark dress holding a little girl. Both smiled, but there was a guarded look in the woman's eyes. On the back was a handwritten note. "Summer 1968, safe day." Chill ran through me. Next was a stack of papers, a life insurance policy in my grandmother's name, but the beneficiary was someone I'd never heard of, Eleanor Price. There was also a copy of a birth certificate for a child named Anna Price, with no father listed. I opened the notebook. Her handwriting filled the pages with short stories, notes, and addresses. One passage made me slow down. Eleanor arrived on a rainy night, holding Anna. She was trembling, saying she couldn't go back home because it was dangerous. I promised to keep her secret. This mansion will always be a safe place for them, and for anyone who needs it. One day, Rebecca will understand why. I sat there in silence, feeling like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. My grandmother wasn't just the gentle woman I remembered. She had quietly helped people in danger, and the mansion was part of that mission. If this secret was lost, not only would her legacy be erased, but also the humanitarian history she left behind. The next morning, I took the documents to my trusted lawyer, David Harper. After looking them over, David frowned. "Rebecca, this isn't just a family matter. If what your grandmother did was legitimate, the mansion might be tied to a trust or a legal intent that's still valid." "You mean there could be a legal restriction protecting this property?" "Yes, possibly. But I need to check the property records and notarized documents from that time. If there's a clause stating it must be preserved, you have absolute right to refuse any sale, no matter the family pressure." We went to the town hall together. The clerk searched for a while, then brought out a thick file wrapped in tied paper. Inside was a deed transfer from 1969 stating, "Property to be retained for humanitarian purposes, under the direct ownership of Margaret Hall and designated heirs." My name was listed in the designated heir section, with my grandmother's signature dated 5 years before her death. I had never known she'd updated the documents. Gratitude and emotion welled up in my chest. David looked at me and nodded. This is gold. No one can force you to sell if you don't want to. In fact, if your mother tries to interfere, you could sue. I thanked David and took the file back to the mansion. On the way, my phone rang. It was Melissa. Hey, I heard Mom say you're making the house sale difficult. I don't understand why you're being so stubborn. Melissa, I'm not just keeping a house. I'm keeping a promise to Grandma. There are things you don't know, and I'm not sure Mom wants you to know. Her voice faltered. What do you mean? Mom says this is just about giving me a stable place to live. I hesitated, then decided. Melissa, when you truly want to hear the whole story, I'll show you all the documents. But if you only listen to Mom, you'll never understand. There was silence for a few seconds, then she hung up. That night, I organized all the documents, photos, and the notebook into a secure box. I knew I had entered a different stage of this battle. Now I had both moral and legal grounds to protect the mansion. But I also knew once my mother learned what I had, she wouldn't stand still. I sat by the window, watching the moon's reflection on the lake, and whispered to myself, Grandma, I'm starting to understand. And I won't let anyone erase your story. I knew that even with solid legal proof, my mother wouldn't easily give up. She had never lost a fight, especially when what she wanted was in my hands. And then David's warning echoed in my head. Don't get complacent. When they feel cornered, they'll play an entirely different game. 3 days later, I got an unexpected call from my mother. Her voice was unusually sweet. Rebecca, I think we should talk. Not argue, just reconcile. I'm making roast chicken like you like. Come for dinner tomorrow night. I hesitated. The trap in that invitation was obvious, but I also knew if I refused, she'd use it to reinforce the image of the daughter who avoids family she was building. I agreed, but mentally prepared for anything. The next day, I drove to her house. The dining table looked like something out of a magazine. White tablecloth, scented candles, and the crystal glasses I hadn't seen her use in years. Melissa was there too, dressed neatly, but her eyes avoided mine. Dinner moved slowly. My mother kept talking about neighbors, charity events, and Melissa's wedding plans. It was peaceful to the point of being fake. When dessert came, she set down her fork and looked straight at me. Rebecca, Melissa and I have been thinking a lot about the house. I know you value it, but I hope you understand your sister's situation. I took a sip of water, waiting for her to continue. Instead of selling, you could sign a power of attorney. That way, I can, temporarily, put it in Melissa's name so she can get a mortgage to buy her own house. When it's done, I'll give it back. I let out a small laugh, though my insides went cold. Temporary. You expect me to believe that? You know very well if I sign, I lose ownership. The atmosphere thickened. My mother slowly cut a piece of cake but didn't eat it, letting the knife and fork clink together sharply. You always think I'm out to hurt you. Family means trust, Rebecca. Trust needs a reason, Mom. You brought strangers into my house, tried to sell it behind my back, and now you want me to sign away my rights. What exactly am I supposed to trust? Melissa set her spoon down, her voice slightly shaky. Rebecca, I just want a home for my little family. You can buy one yourself. Or Mom can help you with her own money. Why does it have to be the mansion? I replied, keeping my tone calm but firm. My mother's eyes darkened. She motioned for Melissa to fetch something from the living room. A moment later, Melissa returned with a man in a suit. Jeff, the lawyer I had met at the cafe the previous week. Jeff placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. Rebecca, this is the new agreement. If you sign today, the family will make sure you receive a large settlement and avoid going to court. I looked Jeff straight in the eye. Are you threatening me? No, I'm just advising you to take the easier way, he replied with a detached tone. My mother cut in. Rebecca, you know I don't like airing family business in public. But if you keep being stubborn, I'll have to take this to court. I folded the papers and slid them back toward them. If you want to go to court, go ahead. But remember, I have all the evidence, from legal documents to video of you trespassing in the house. My mother's face changed. Jeff glanced at her, as if waiting for the next signal. Finally, she stood leaning toward me. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. I stood too, picking up my bag. I won't regret protecting Grandma's legacy. Leaving my mother's house, I knew I'd just walked out of a test round, and the next one would be far more brutal. That night, I sat in the study at the mansion, opened my laptop and checked my email. My inbox was filled with messages from old friends, colleagues, and even clients, asking about the property dispute they'd heard about. I didn't need to guess where the leak came from. My mother couldn't beat me legally, but she could attack my reputation and image. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. In my mind, I heard my grandmother's voice. You'll understand the reason when the time comes. Maybe that time had truly arrived. I realized that without a strategic move, my mother would keep me on the defensive. And that move had to start with revealing the truth, but at the right time and in the right way. If you've ever been in a situation where family uses your own bonds to force you to give in, you know how crushing that pressure can be. To not miss the next turning point, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications now, because what comes next will change everything. 3 days after that calculated reconciliation, while I was still weighing my next step, a strange text appeared on my phone. The sender was Henry Collins, a name I'd never heard before. The message was brief. I used to be Margaret Hall's personal attorney. We need to meet. I know why she left the mansion to you. At first, I suspected this might be another trick from my mother, but the way he referred to my grandmother gave me pause. I decided to call back. His voice was deep, slow, and carried the slight tremor of age. Rebecca, I've been silent for over 30 years. But I think it's time you knew. If you don't, you won't be able to protect what she left you. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in the suburbs, nearly an hour's drive from Chicago. It was quiet, rarely crowded. When I walked in, he was already in the corner, a cup of black tea and an old briefcase in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he said. His eyes still sharp despite the years etched into his face. "I know you're having trouble with your family over the mansion. I suspected this might happen from the day Margaret read her will." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "Your grandmother wasn't just a kind woman. In 1968, she was part of a secret network that helped women and children escape domestic violence. The lakeside mansion was a safe haven. All the ownership documents, even the property's legal structure, were designed to ensure it would never fall into the hands of someone who could harm that purpose." He opened the briefcase and pulled out an old file, its edges yellowed. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting on some of the first pages. "This is the original agreement between your grandmother and several non-profit organizations from that time. I kept it locked away for years because she instructed me to release it only when I saw danger signs threatening her wishes." I carefully turned each page. In addition to clauses protecting the mansion's humanitarian purpose, there was a list of dozens of women who had been helped, along with thank you letters. Some were handwritten, the ink faded but still legible. If the mansion is sold or transferred to someone outside this purpose, all these records will be dismantled, and the secret fund your grandmother established will be frozen, Henry explained. "I believe your mother doesn't know this. To her, it's just a valuable asset." I looked up, meeting Henry's gaze. "If I make these documents public, I could stop them cold. But I'd also be dragging these women's personal stories into the light." Henry nodded. "Exactly. And that's why your grandmother never told anyone, not even her daughter. Rebecca, you need to choose a way to protect the mansion while respecting the privacy of those who were helped." I sat quietly for a long time. The faces in the photos, the shaky lines of gratitude, seemed to be looking straight at me, trusting me to keep their stories safe. "I won't let them be hurt," I said slowly. "But I also won't let my mother take this house." Henry gave a faint smile. "Your grandmother was right to trust you. I'll help if you need a witness or legal confirmation." We parted with a firm handshake. On the drive back, I felt I had a clearer picture. My mother didn't know the full truth, but she wouldn't stop if she thought there was still a chance. I needed a strategy strong enough to make her back down, without betraying my grandmother's secret. That night, I laid all the documents Henry had given me on the table. Among them was a short letter from my grandmother, likely written for me but never delivered. Her familiar handwriting read, "Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means the house has been threatened. Remember, your strength lies not only in the law, but in the truth you hold. But truth only has value when it's used to protect, not to retaliate." I set the letter down, letting out a quiet sigh. Deep down, I knew she wanted me to be strong but not bitter. But how could I keep that boundary when the person across from me was willing to cross every line? 2 days later, Melissa called, her voice hesitant. "Rebecca, I heard someone strange met with you. Mom says they might be someone helping you flip the situation." "What are you doing?" "I'm just learning more about the house," I replied calmly. "Melissa, I hope you can trust me. This isn't as simple as Mom thinks." She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "I don't know who to believe anymore. Mom says one thing, you say another. But I just know she's really angry. Being angry because she's not getting what she wants doesn't make her right," I said. "You don't have to take my side, but at least hear both sides." She didn't respond, just sighed and hung up. That conversation told me my mother was beginning to suspect I had a trump card, and she would do anything to find out what it was. I had to be more careful than ever. That night, I stored all the documents in a safe deposit box at the bank, keeping only a few necessary copies on an encrypted computer. I also contacted David to discuss options if my mother kept applying legal pressure. Henry's story had given me a huge advantage, but it also came with a heavy moral weight. I knew this battle wouldn't just end with a court ruling. It would test the very principles my grandmother had taught me since childhood. It took me nearly a week to decide how to face my mother. The documents Henry gave me were like a double-edged sword. If I revealed them, I'd win outright, but the past of the women my grandmother had helped would be dragged into the open. I needed a move strong enough to win while keeping my promise to her. Finally, I decided to arrange a meeting at the mansion, inviting my mother, Melissa, and their lawyer Jeff. But I also invited Henry and David, the only 2 people I trusted, to witness. That afternoon, the sky was heavy and gray, clouds thick with the promise of a storm. I set up chairs in the living room and placed a file neatly in the center of the table. When everyone arrived, the tension was immediate. My mother walked in, her eyes sweeping the room as if to remind me she still considered this place hers. Melissa followed closely, looking uneasy. Jeff kept a calm demeanor, but I could sense guardedness in every move. I invited everyone to sit. Henry spoke first, his voice deep but steady. "Thank you for coming. I'm Henry Collins, formerly Margaret Hall's personal attorney. I'm here because there is something very important regarding the ownership and purpose of this mansion." My mother raised an eyebrow and smirked. "I don't think we need outsiders meddling in family matters." Henry didn't waver. "Margaret left explicit legal instructions, and I've kept them for over 30 years at her request." I opened the file and pulled out a copy of the notarized document with my grandmother's signature, placing it in front of my mother and Jeff. "This is the agreement, notarized in 1969. It clearly states the mansion is to be retained for humanitarian purposes, and only the designated heir has full authority. That heir is me." Jeff picked it up to examine it, but my mother crossed her arms, her voice growing sharp. These old papers don't prove anything. David spoke up, his tone precise. They prove everything, ma'am. This document is valid and has never been revoked or altered. It's more than enough to protect my client from any transfer or sale demands, even from family. My mother turned to Melissa, seeking support. See, your sister's using the law to go against the family. Melissa stayed silent. Her eyes wavered, and I knew this was my chance to speak to her directly, without my mother's filter. Melissa, you deserve to know the truth. Grandma didn't leave this house to me because I'm the oldest or because I'm selfish. She did it because this place was once a refuge for those who needed protection. If it's sold, all of that will be gone. My mother jumped in immediately. That's just a made-up story to keep the house. Henry then placed a bundle of old letters on the table. I wish I didn't have to show these, but Margaret instructed me. If anyone tried to take the house for personal gain, let them see its true value. These are thank you letters from women who were helped here. Their identities will, of course, remain confidential. Melissa gently picked up one letter, read a few lines, then set it down. She said nothing, but I noticed her shoulders slump slightly. Jeff glanced at his watch, then said to my mother, I suggest you reconsider. With these documents, the chances of winning in court are virtually zero. My mother didn't reply, just looked at me with a mix of anger and frustration. I knew this was the time to end the confrontation decisively. I will not sell, rent, or transfer this house. It's not just property. It's a part of history that Grandma trusted me to protect. If you or anyone else continues to interfere, I'll use every legal means available. The room felt heavy. Rain began to tap against the roof. Melissa quietly stood and stepped out onto the porch, as if to avoid the direct clash. My mother gathered her purse, but before leaving, she paused at the door and turned back. You think you've won, but family is more than just paperwork. I answered softly but firmly. Yes. Family is also about respect and keeping promises. The door closed, leaving a long silence in the room. Henry placed a hand on my shoulder. You did what she wanted. But be prepared. This may not be over. He nodded. Outside, the rain was falling harder, but inside I felt a rare sense of relief. At least today, I had protected what mattered most. What does this moment make you think of when it comes to boundaries within a family? Share your thoughts or hit like so I know you're here. After the standoff at the mansion, I thought my mother might at least back off for a while. But I had underestimated her resolve. She was never the type to give up easily, and this time she was willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. About a week later, when I had just returned from the office to spend the weekend at the mansion, my phone rang. It was an alert from the security system. Unusual movement detected at night. I opened the app to review the footage, and my blood froze. On the screen, 3 figures were quietly opening the side service door. My mother and 2 unfamiliar men dressed in dark clothing. I immediately called the town police. While waiting, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. They walked straight into my grandmother's study, the place where I used to keep Henry's original documents. One of the men bent down at the desk drawer and pulled out a small safe. I knew it wasn't the one I currently used, because the originals were already at the bank. But that safe still held some of my grandmother's personal belongings and copies of important documents. Just 15 minutes later, police lights flashed at the gate. I had just managed to drive back myself. When I stepped inside, the sight made my heart clench. My mother was standing in the middle of the living room, her face pale when she saw me, and the 2 men were being held by the police. "Rebecca, let me explain," she began, her voice trembling but still trying to appear composed. I looked her straight in the eye. "Explain breaking into my house in the middle of the night and taking a safe?" One of the officers stepped toward me. "Would you like to press charges for unlawful entry and theft as Hall?" I stayed silent for a few seconds. We both knew that if I said yes, she'd be facing a criminal record. Finally, I took a deep breath. I just want them to leave immediately and never come back unless invited. My mother looked at me, her eyes a mix of defiance and fear. As the police escorted her to the door, she managed to mutter, "You'll regret turning this into a war." I didn't answer. I just stood there, listening to the door close and the sound of the police car driving away, before turning back inside. On the floor, the old safe was open and empty. I picked up a piece of paper that had fallen out. It was one of the copies of my grandmother's will, the corner slightly torn. The next morning, I received an express-delivered handwritten letter. There was no sender name on the envelope, but I immediately recognized my mother's handwriting. Inside were just a few short lines. "If you don't hand over the mansion within a month, I'll take everything to court and make it public. Don't test me." I brought the letter to David. He frowned. "This is outright intimidation. And if they sue, they'll lose, but the process will be long and noisy. I think they're trying to wear you down and make you impatient. But David, they're willing to break the law. Last night my mother broke in. What else might she do?" he asked. He looked at me seriously. "I'm not ruling anything out. And that's why we need to prepare the final step, a move that leaves them with no way back." I knew exactly what that move was. It wouldn't just be defensive, it would be proactive, sealing every loophole. I had hesitated for so long, wanting to keep the peace, but now it was different. My mother had crossed the last line when she broke into my home and tried to take documents. 3 days later, I sent my mother a written notice, signed by my attorney. Any act of entering or accessing the mansion without written permission from the owner will be considered a violation of the law and prosecuted accordingly. I knew this would make her furious, but it was the final barrier. And as expected, that very evening my phone rang. It was my mother. "Do you really want to turn your own mother into a criminal, Rebecca?" she said, each word sharp. "No, Mum. You did that yourself when you decided to break in and take my safe," I replied calmly. "You still have a choice, but from now on, the boundaries are clear." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then she hung up without another word. As I set the phone down, I realized I had officially closed off all traditional paths to reconciliation. But at the same time, I felt a strange relief. I was no longer passively waiting for her next move. I had built a wall she would have to see every time she thought about stepping forward. Still, I knew one thing. For my mother, that wall might just be a challenge to find a way over. And if she tried, I'd be ready. After sending the legal notice, I heard almost nothing from her for weeks. No calls, no messages, no gossip trickling in from her circle like before. At first, the quiet made me wary, but then I realized I could finally breathe a little easier. I spent more time on work and on myself. On weekends, I returned to the mansion, opened the windows to let in light and breeze, and sat on the porch watching the lake change colors with the seasons. I started restoring the back garden, where my grandmother had once planted lavender and a long row of hydrangeas. Every time I put my hands in the soil, I pictured her kneeling by the flower beds, hands dirty but smiling brightly. One Saturday morning, while I was trimming the roses, Melissa appeared at the gate. She wore a thick wool coat, her hair tied back, no makeup like usual. I was a little surprised but opened the gate. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. We sat at the wooden table on the porch. Melissa stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "I know things have been awful lately. I'm not here to argue or ask for anything. I just wanted to talk as sisters." I nodded, waiting for her to go on. "Earlier this week, Mom told me she doesn't understand why you're being so stubborn. I asked her if she had ever actually listened to you. And she went silent. It's the first time I've seen her without an answer." I looked at her, trying to guess what had shifted her tone. I think I've been so used to Mom protecting me that I never questioned it. But now that I'm about to be a mother, I'm starting to understand the feeling of wanting to protect something precious. And I think that's what you feel about this house. I exhaled slowly. Yes, but it's not just the house. It's a promise to Grandma. And to the people she once quietly protected. Melissa nodded, her eyes a little red. I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner. I can't promise I'll convince Mom to change completely, but at least, I won't be part of her plan anymore. We sat a little longer in silence, listening to the rustling leaves and the gentle lapping of the lake. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a new beginning, and I knew I valued that. Few days later, my mother called me. Her voice was so calm I almost didn't recognize it. Rebecca, I heard Melissa visited you. Yes, and we talked. I have been thinking. Maybe I've been too focused on thinking I know what's best for everyone, and forgot to ask what they want. I stayed silent, letting her continue. I won't try to take the house anymore. But I hope you remember that family matters. I'm not promising to change overnight, but I'll try. I could feel how hard those words were for her. It wasn't a full apology, but for a woman who had never admitted fault, it was a big step. I understand. And I'll try too, Mom, I replied. Since that call, our relationship has been less tense. She still keeps her distance, but she's stopped trying to access the mansion or send cryptic messages. I don't fool myself into thinking everything is perfect, but I know I've established boundaries, and they're being respected at least enough. I continued caring for the house and my grandmother's secret fund. With help from Henry and a local nonprofit, I converted the secondary living room into a discreet space that could be used for emergency shelter for women in need, just as my grandmother once did. No one outside the support team knew about it, and we kept it quiet and completely secure. One spring afternoon, while organizing the bookshelf, I found an old photo tucked between two novels. It showed me at about 10 years old, sitting on the mansion steps, my head leaning on Grandma's shoulder. Behind us was a row of vibrant lavender. The sun was setting, casting golden light over us both. I held the photo and sat down by the window. Outside, the sunset was tinting the lake the same golden hue as in the picture. I whispered, "Grandma, I kept my promise." In that moment, I realized all the arguments, pressure, and exhaustion of the past had ultimately led me to a more peaceful place. Not because the family relationship was perfect, but because I knew I had stood firm against what threatened what I cherished. And more than that, I had preserved both the house and the spirit of my grandmother's legacy, intact, just as it was the day she entrusted it to me. Every family story has its hidden corners that outsiders can't fully understand. For me, the journey to keep the house wasn't just about holding onto a piece of property. It was about protecting memories, a promise, and faith in what's right. But I know everyone will see it in their own way. Some family arguments aren't about winning or losing, but about setting boundaries so love can stand in the right place. I've learned that keeping a house can sometimes mean keeping a promise to the past, while opening its doors can mean making space for a future built on respect. No one learns the lesson of boundaries in a single day. We need clashes, silence to truly listen, and the courage to say enough without bitterness. If this story reminds you of a turning point you faced, where you had to hold on but also let go, I'd love to hear your perspective. What helped you stand firm while keeping your kindness? Share so we know we're not alone on the journey of making peace with both our families and ourselves. And if you find value in these slices of life, hit like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. So whenever there's a new story about kind boundaries and healing, we'll meet again right when it matters most. See you in the next story.